Hi, I'm Melanie. I was born in a small port town to wealthy parents. My dad owned fishing boats in all the seafood shops in town, and I was the sole heiress to his vast empire. But I didn't like the idea of selling fish my whole life. It was profitable and solid business, but I was dreaming of something else. That's what I'm going to tell you about today. But first, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I loved our town with my whole heart. Fresh sea breeze, the cries of seagulls, kind neighbors. What upset me was that few people knew about that heavenly place. Almost no one visited our town, and I wanted to change that. I wanted to open an amazing resort hotel to attract tourists to it, but my dad didn't want to hear it. Nonsense. As soon as you turn 18, I'll hand over the management of our family business to you. But Dad, that's not for me. I want to achieve everything and fulfill my dream on my own. Dad and I were both stubborn to a fault and often argued. He wanted me to use his influence and want for nothing, but I longed to reach the top without any help. I didn't want any special treatment, so I hid the fact that my father was the richest man in town from everyone. I decided to start from the very bottom. There was only one hotel in our town, and I got a job there as a maid to gain experience and learn more about the business. My boss was a guy called Christopher Young. At first, I couldn't help but stare at the owner of the hotel with admiration, but I quickly realized that Christopher's dazzling appearance hid an insufferable personality. He was narcissistic and an arrogant womanizer. Guess who became Employee of the Month? That's right, me again. I only tolerated him because I wanted to become a hotel manager and prove to my dad that I could achieve something without using his connections. He had no faith in me. My daughter working as a maid. You're an embarrassment. Christopher will promote me soon. You'll see. I really did work hard for the promotion, but Mr. Young Boss was in no hurry to make me a manager and took credit for all my achievements. A few months went by and I was running out of patience. Moreover, my relationship with Dad was becoming more and more strained by the day. He demanded I quit and intern at his company, but I wasn't ready to give up on my dream. Soon, I noticed that the eternally cheerful Christopher was miserable and irritable. We weren't friends, so I didn't try and find out what was wrong with him. And then one day, I came into his office and heard him talking to someone on the phone. "Give me a break! I'll figure something out!" With those words, he threw his phone away and wearily ran his fingers through his hair. A hard day? It was only then that he noticed me. Christopher looked at me thoughtfully and then suddenly smiled like a total wacko. "Melanie, you're my savior!" "What? You've been working for me for a long time and you know all my habits." "Let's say I do. It'll be easy for you to pretend we're married. Will you do it?" "No way!" I didn't know what he was up to, but I wanted no part in it. I turned around and was about to leave, but Christopher caught up to me. "Please, Melanie, you can ask me for whatever you want in return." That gave me pause. What did I want? Well, that was my chance. "Okay, I want a promotion. Deal. I'll promote you to a manager position. Consider it done." Christopher didn't explain why he needed me to become his fake wife of all things. Well, it wasn't like I really cared about his reasons. I was pursuing my own goals. The next day, we put on rings and pretended we were a couple in love. We went on some fake dates and even photoshopped some wedding photos. Was it weird? Oh yeah, for sure. But was it worth it? I sure hope so. After all, Dad was putting more and more pressure on me by the day. "When are you going to come to your senses and take over my business?" "Never. Soon, I will become a hotel manager, and after that, I will open a hotel of my own." About a week later, Christopher said we were done practicing. It was time to go to the neighboring town and visit his relatives. "My family wants to meet my wife." "What? Heck no, you're asking for too much." "I promise, as soon as we get back, I'll promote you. You won't have to pretend to be my wife anymore." He sighed heavily and told me that his family was the entire reason for what we were doing. His parents were pressuring him to get married, but he wanted to be left alone and do his own thing. Oh, I could relate to that. In the end, I agreed to meet Christopher's family. I told Dad I was going to a special camp for future businessmen. "I'm glad you finally changed your mind. If you're lying to me, there will be consequences." After a few hours on the road, Christopher and I were standing in front of the gates of his family estate. That's how I found out my boss's family was filthy rich. "Why don't you live here?" I moved because I didn't want to use family connections to succeed. Wow! In that moment, I saw him in a new light. Who could have thought that we had so much in common? All the new information I learned made me respect Christopher. At dinner, he introduced me to his family and showed them fake photos from our wedding. Mr. and Mrs. Young were happy for their son. I made a good impression on them. However, Christopher's younger brother Scott didn't seem to buy our performance. He glared at us and tried to catch us in a lie all evening. Why didn't you invite anyone to your wedding?" "It was a small ceremony, brother." Things between them seemed tense. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Scott hated his brother. After dinner, he cornered me, probably hoping to take me by surprise. "Melanie, you're not really married worried, are you? Did Christopher bribe you? To be honest, I didn't like that weasel. He was clearly jealous of Christopher's success. I couldn't let Scott see through our lies. What are you talking about? Christopher and I are mad about each other. Yeah, right. You can't fool me. Sooner or later, I'm going to find out the truth. With those words, he turned away and left. Christopher and I kept acting like a sweet couple. He was treating me like a queen. He would hold my hand and play with my hair. Even though I knew none of it was real, it still made my heart skip a beat. I did my best to avoid falling for Christopher for real, but it didn't seem to be working. Meanwhile, Scott kept playing a spy. He was always watching me and trying to find proof we were lying. You should have seen him when I kissed Christopher on the cheek in front of him. Ugh, such a good girl couldn't really have fallen for my moron of a brother. It almost sounded like Scott was jealous. It was hilarious. Soon I noticed something weird. Christopher and his parents kept exchanging glances and whispering about something. Mom, Dad, I told you I'd deal with it. You did a great job, son. The photos look very convincing. I didn't like their sly smirks and hoped to hear more, but they pointedly fell silent as soon as they saw me. I had a feeling they were hiding some sort of secret. On top of everything else, Dad was getting suspicious of me. He called me literally every hour and wouldn't leave me alone. Dad, I swear I'm at business camp. My gut is telling me you're lying. Scott came up to me, clearly trying to eavesdrop, so I had to hurry and end the conversation. Dad, I've got to go. The counselor is calling us for business training. I put the phone away and tried to leave, but Scott grabbed my arm. Why don't you want your dad to know you're visiting your in-laws? Maybe it's because Christopher isn't really your husband. Dang it! Scott was so freaking annoying. I had it with my stubborn dad and with Christopher's family too. Instead of saying anything, I found my boss and said I wanted to leave. We convinced your parents were married. It's time to go back home. Please just wait a little longer, Melanie. A relative of ours is coming for a visit soon, and I need to introduce you to him. I felt like ripping my own hair out, but Christopher was counting on me and I couldn't let him down. Oh, fine. Thank you, you're the best. As soon as we get back to our town, I'll make you the manager of the hotel. Dad called me the next morning again. He was shouting so loudly, I thought I'd go deaf for a second. I know everything about your little adventure, Melanie. Have you lost your mind? Why are you pretending to be your boss's wife? Come home at once. Heck, it sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't think of anything better to do than just turn off my phone. How did Dad find out where I was or what I was doing? Scott's nasty laugh rang out in the hallway. But of course, he must have called my dad and ratted me out. What the fudge? By agreeing to help my boss, I ruined my relationship with my father. It was too late to go back now. That evening, Christopher's relative finally arrived. It was his rich grandfather. Everyone except Scott immediately crowded around the old man to kiss up to him. Grandpa, it's so great to see you. My favorite grandson. There you are. Tell me some good news. Christopher shyly said that he finally got married and introduced me to him. Soon, Christopher's grandpa said he approved of his grandson's choice and told Christopher they needed to talk. Mr. and Mrs. Young exchanged happy glances and said their plan had worked, but Scott gritted his teeth in anger and stormed out. God, my family pisses me off. Things went downhill after that. After talking to his grandfather, for some reason, Christopher lost all interest in me. He started acting like a sarcastic jerk again and treated me and his brother like servants. Christopher, if you don't explain what's going on, I'll leave right this second. You played your part, Melanie, so I don't care. Oh, is that right? Who did he think he was? Scott definitely knew what was going on, so I decided it was time for us to have an honest conversation. Okay, you win. I was only pretending to be Christopher's wife to get a promotion. Was that so hard? Couldn't you have told me the truth right from the start? If you hadn't been lying, I would have been honest with you too and wouldn't have tattled to your father. By the way, I'm sorry about that. I thought that would make you leave and you would stop helping my brother. It's whatever. I'm over it. Tell me what's going on with Christopher. Scott said that his brother had never done anything by himself in his entire life. Their parents had bought him the hotel we worked at, but he was such a terrible manager, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. Now Christopher and his parents had run out of money. That's probably why Christopher had been so irritable when I met him. And recently our grandpa told us terrible news. He's ill and isn't going to be with us for much longer. 6 months at best. Christopher had always been his favorite grandson and grandpa wanted to leave his entire fortune to him, but only if Christopher had settled down and got married. Scott went on to say that their parents were so afraid of not getting their hands on the inheritance, they tried to convince Christopher to marry, but that cunning snake had a better idea. He convinced me to pretend I was his wife, and it worked. Christopher's grandfather promised to leave everything to him. Christopher didn't need me anymore, which is why he no longer made goo-goo eyes at me. I should have never trusted him. Don't be so hard on yourself. Christopher has always been the king of lies. I need to talk to him. I found Christopher and told him I knew everything, but he just smirked at me and said there was more. That hotel closed right after we left, so your dream of becoming a manager won't come true. I'm so sorry. Nah, I'm lying again. I'm not sorry at all. Wow, I deceived Dad and ruined our relationship to get a promotion, but it had all been for nothing. I lost it and said I would get back at Christopher. I'm going to tell your grandfather we aren't really married. Go ahead. He just walked into the closet. I took off and ran into the closet Christopher pointed out. It was only when the door slammed shut behind me that I realized what a terrible mistake I had made. Stay there and cool down. That jerk locked me in and I didn't have my phone with me. Dang it! Christopher's parents were on his side, so they ignored my pleas for help. Luckily, eventually Scott heard me and opened the door. I pulled him into a tight hug. I never thought I'd be so happy to see you. Wow, I don't usually hug married girls. This is no time for jokes yet. We need to find your grandfather and tell him the truth. Christopher doesn't deserve to get an inheritance. Are you with me? Finally, someone but me sees my brother's rotten at his core. Of course I'm with you. Unfortunately, we greatly underestimated Christopher. He thought everything through and made sure that Scott and I wouldn't be able to talk with their grandfather. Each time we tried, Christopher would leave and take their grandpa with him. When that didn't work, he would stand outside their grandfather's bedroom and refuse to let us in. Get lost. Grandpa's not feeling well. Don't bother him. You won't be able to hide him from us forever. We'll see about that. One day, Scott finally saw his grandpa at dinner. Grandpa, we need to talk. They're all lying to you. His older brother and parents immediately dragged him away and locked him in his room. Of course, their grandpa was suspicious after that. But Christopher told him Scott had just had a nervous breakdown. He even called doctors to make it look more convincing. I couldn't believe that someone could be so cynical for the sake of easy money. As soon as I could, I freed Scott and told him I had just seen his grandfather in the garden. Let's go. This is our chance. But as soon as we ran out onto the street, we saw the old man getting into his limo to head back home. Oh no, if he left now, everything would be lost. Safe journey, Grandpa. Thanks again for leaving everything to me. At that moment, another car drove up to the gates. It was my dad. He got out of the car and stormed up to me. Melanie, you haven't answered the phone for several days, so I came here to drive you home myself. Get in the car now. I won't let you pretend you're your boss's wife anymore. As soon as Christopher's grandfather heard those words, he got out of the limo to talk to my father. Excuse me? What are you talking about? They looked at each other and then suddenly hugged. That's how I found out they were old acquaintances. Mr. Young, what a surprise. My dear student, how you've grown. Is Melanie your daughter then? Dad explained to him that I was pretending to be Christopher's wife to get a promotion. Christopher's grandpa frowned and said he would not forgive his grandson for his lies. Christopher, you have disappointed me. I'm going to have to write you out of my will. Christopher and his greedy parents looked close to tears. Jeez, they were acting like children. Meanwhile, Scott's grandpa finally came up to him. I'm sorry I never put you first, Scott. I see that you deserve to inherit my fortune now. Thanks, Grandpa, but I was only trying to tell you the truth because it was the right thing to do. I don't want your money. I want to achieve everything by myself. His grandfather praised him and said he would donate the money to charities. Then, he shook my dad's hand and got back into the limo. I grew to respect Scott and wanted to kiss the guy on the cheek, but Dad dragged me into the car without letting me say goodbye to him. Soon, we were back at home. I apologized to Dad for being stubborn as a mule and promised that if he wanted me to, I would run his business. But to my surprise, he patted my head good-naturedly. No, Melanie, I saw what happens when you decide everything for your children. I don't want you to become like Christopher. Follow your own path, sweetheart. I dreamed of hearing those words my whole life, and I was on cloud 9. A couple of days later, Scott came to visit me. He said that he had been working on an app that would tell users about places worth visiting. That's awesome! It could help attract tourists to our wonderful city. I'm actually working on a resort hotel project right now. We should team up. There's something I've been meaning to do. What is that? Instead of answering, I kissed him on the cheek, and we beamed at each other.